Independent music sales have surged as lockdowns were enforced around the world. The multi-million-pound success of Bandcamp's no-fee days has shown that many fans are keen to support their favourite artists in a time of crises. But it has also exposed the fragility of the industry, which felt like it was crying out for a solution long before the virus started. That solution may well lie in the cryptocurrency space and its revolutionary technology, blockchain. A lot of people are already familiar with Bitcoin, but many crypto believers are advocates for other lesser-known blockchains such as Ethereum. Unlike Bitcoin, Ethereum uses smart contracts, which means that there are almost endless possibilities for how it could be used. A smart contract is like a digital version of a regular one, but it gets stored inside the blockchain so it can't be tampered with, and every transaction is validated by other users on the network. That can make it a useful tool for sending, saving, lending, or even borrowing money, and it means you don't have to trust a go-between such as a bank. So how can this help artists? To answer that, let's take a look at how the music industry currently works. Streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube dominate. Last year, streaming accounted for 56% of all recorded music revenue. The platforms pay a cut to distributors and also keep a large chunk for themselves. The rest is sent to revenue collection services to distribute the funds. At the end of the chain, the artist can usually expect to earn approximately half a penny per stream. If they can't be traced, money gets lost in a so-called royalty black box, a surplus estimated to total as much as £2 billion. For music sales, artists typically rely on platforms like Beatport or Bandcamp. Bandcamp is the most favourable for artists. The site usually takes 15% commission from music sales or 10% from merchandise. Most others like Beatport charge up to 30%, and they often only accept track submissions from distributors. Smart contracts could disrupt everything. If a streaming service had an automated contract for distributing royalties, artists could get paid almost instantly. The funds would be divided in a faster, fairer, and more transparent way. In fact, if blockchain really takes off, a lot of the platforms and services the industry relies on could be replaced by more efficient ones ruled by code. Revenue collection bodies, digital distributors, online vendors, and even the streaming giants, they all stand to lose relevance when a smart contract has the potential to bring artist and fan closer together. Crypto faces difficult challenges. Blockchains need to scale to allow for thousands of users on the network. Cryptocurrencies are still best known for their extreme price volatility. The blockchain space will need to prove its worth if it's to attract more than speculative boom and bust cycles. But if it does eventually succeed, like many hope, it could utterly change the way the music industry operates. If the internet took away the value of music from artists, crypto could be a chance to give it back.